Welcome, welcome. I see folks coming in here, joining into our webinar today, our conversation. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lindsay Kugel. I'm the Director of Partnerships and our teaching community at the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And I am excited and feeling very privileged to have two special guests with us today in our conversation. So I would love to first introduce Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute's CEO, Rich Fernandez. So we refer to ourselves as Silly, by the way, so just, be okay with that. So Rich is Silly's CEO. Rich comes from a background of over 30 years of mindfulness practice, as well as work in organizations such as Google, eBay, Bank of America, and other financial institutions, and brings his PhD in clinical psychology to bear with all of the work we do here at Silly. And we're really excited to talk with him. So hello, Rich.
Hello.
And we're excited to talk with Rich today, specifically about the mindfulness movement film. And so I get to introduce our other special guest here, Rob Beemer. And Rob has been a documentary filmmaker for over 25 years, making films for the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, all kinds of both journalism and science-based films, including Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, and we got to hear about some of the fun existential conversations with Morgan Freeman that happened there. So just really, really excited. Rob is an Emmy Award-winning director, and we're just so excited to have you here to talk about the mindfulness movement film. Welcome. Oh, I think we're having trouble hearing you there, Rob. Rich, can you hear
I
us?
have a question about the film. Oh, now you're back.
Yeah, here we are. All right, go ahead.
Right.
So welcome, Rob. So good.
Yeah, I was just saying thank you for hosting this discussion about the film and looking forward to talking.
Beautiful, thank you. And apologies for the echo there, or the delay there, but I think we're all good. All right. So welcome to you both. Really looking forward to this discussion around the mindfulness movement, the film as it was filmed originally in 2017 and 2018, and how we see the mindfulness movement progressing from there. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rich to start us off.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. And hello, Rob. Nice to see you again. And welcome to everybody who's on here. We thought we could start our time together with actually some mindfulness practice. Though the film is called The Mindfulness Movement, we like to think that mindfulness is really kind of a direct personal experience at its core. And so a practice above all. And so we wanted to invite everyone to perhaps, if you're comfortable, do some mindful awareness practice with us. And I'll offer some very light guidance, only for a few minutes here in the beginning, just so we kind of start off right kind of at the foundation. So hopefully these are fairly simple practices for everyone. And again, I'll offer guidance, but what I'd invite you to do if you're comfortable is either close your eyes or simply, if you're more comfortable, direct your gaze downward, softening that visual field, just to start to kind of quiet any distractions that might float through. And I'll invite us to just start to become aware of first our bodies. Become aware of your body, where you find yourself seated or standing. Whatever that means for you, checking in with your body. Perhaps noticing your posture, any tension in your body. And there's nothing to do other than to just observe with a kind of kind attention to begin. And then bringing your attention to your breathing, to this sensation of the air coming in and out of your body. the in-breaths and the out-breaths, and that full repeating cycle of the breathing, gathering and collecting your attention, resting your attention gently but firmly on the breath. Just for a few seconds here, inviting that attention to settle and to rest on the breathing. And sometimes our attention gets pulled away. There's lots of distractions, and that's totally natural. But whatever the case might be for you in this moment, the invitation is to anchor for a moment your attention on this experience of breathing, on the nourishing breath. And just as you are, I'd like to invite us also to exercise a very, very brief gratitude practice, inviting a thought or a sensation or a feeling about something you're grateful for today. One thing that you may be grateful for. Whatever arises, large or small, whatever it may be, is just fine. It's just to take a moment here to pause and to exercise gratitude for one thing in your life. And then finally, just as you are, knowing that it's the closing of one year and perhaps the beginning of a new one with new things coming, I just invite you to consider something that you're hopeful for, one thing that you may be hopeful for in the year to come, and visualize that, whether it be a person or a situation or a state. Just one thing you may be hopeful for as you look ahead. And then as we end this practice together, just inviting you again to reconnect with your body and with your breath. And at your own pace, taking 3 slightly deeper breaths at your own pace. And then as you're ready, if your eyes are closed, opening your eyes or lifting your gaze and rejoining us, the small group we have here. Thank you for your attention and thank you for your practice. Again, we always like to move from this foundation of practice. Mindfulness, in its most essential sense or form, is a practice. So thank you for practicing together with us this morning.
Thank you, Rich. It's great to check in and really see what am I hopeful for. So I am so excited to talk about this film, and I know that you two both met back in 2017 as you were doing the filming, and that it was this huge survey and bringing together of people who believe in the practice of mindfulness and making more of our moments matter, whether it's day-to-day life or work. So I'd love to turn it to Rob and just hear, what are some of the things that both at the time and also now with a little bit of retrospect land for you as the big takeaways or things that still excite you about the film. Love to hear and more, as much about it as you'd like to talk about.
Sure. Well, the initial impetus was, I felt like there wasn't really a comprehensive look at the secular mindfulness world. So I wanted to really cover as much of that as I could. And it grew out of my own practice that I had, back about 13 years ago, had two young kids at home, had a stressful job with a lot of deadlines, was losing my temper too much. And so I needed something to help. And um, that started as, seeing just a magazine in a checkout counter about a Buddhist magazine about meditation and saying, oh, maybe that would help. Um, and then kind of gradually evolving to the more secular mindfulness practice, which I just felt was a better fit for me. So it really became, as I was finding that very useful, using my skills as a filmmaker to help share what I was learning and sharing the benefits of mindfulness with other people. And very happy that people in more than 70 countries so far have watched the film. And really the goal was either to give the existing mindfulness community something to celebrate and point other people to, and then people just discovering mindfulness to get a real taste of it and the benefits of it. And I was very glad that Rich was and Silly were able to participate. It's great that Silly has evolved from Google's Search Inside Yourself program, which was kind of a trailblazer, and when it started. So it's been great to see the evolution and find out some of the backstories about, some of the founders of the movement, back in the 60s and 70s when, people were looking at them like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time with this? And how it's grown over the years. So it's been fun to, talk to all of these people and also showing all the different places that it's being practiced these days by ordinary people. And the reason why I wanted to focus on secular mindfulness besides my own practice is because I felt like that's what's really allowed it to come into, public schools, businesses, police forces, prisons, all types of places. So, I wanted to be able to introduce people to that, clear up misconceptions, and show all the different types of people, types of places where it's being used.
Rob, I'm curious. Actually, it's so interesting. I love to hear the backstory too, because I'm actually on this call also learning a little bit about some of the experiences that led up to this movie. So when you say that you were interested in secular mindfulness, what does that mean to you? I think Lindsay and I have kind of probably our own definitions of that, how we view it here at the Institute. But what were you thinking about and seeing when you were talking about secular mindfulness?
I think for me, as I evolved, so initially it was through a Buddhist lens that I got interested in meditation. And then I started to feel like a little weighed down by some of the terminology and history and definitions of things. And I tend to be somewhat skeptical too. I definitely identified with Dan Harris in the film, where he came into it with some skepticism. And, I had worked on a lot of science-based projects. So as I looked more into the science and felt a little weighed down by the Buddhist terminology, I just felt more comfortable with something that was, still rooted in that idea of it being an ethical practice and to relieve suffering, but using more kind of modern scientific terminology or just simpler terms in general. So for me, that's kind of how it evolved. So I see secular mindfulness as just kind of maybe a few less of the original Buddhist terms and more kind of in today's modern, simpler language.
Yeah, I think we're really aligned with that. I mean, I can, for those of you who are listening and don't know, the institute that Lindsay and I are working at, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, it started at Google. And I was formerly an employee there. I was looking after executive education. And one of my dear colleagues and one of the founders of this institute, Meng Tan, was really interested in seeing ways to approach the practices that are around mindfulness and meditation from a kind of a science-based and evidence-based way. Of course, Google being a very empirical, data-driven culture, I think the science and the evidence base was really important. And what we arrived at was that there is a way that these practices really anchor on neuroscience and really anchor on kind of the ways that our brains and our minds really work, and that we can actually kind of hack, or like start to cultivate, perhaps is a word I like better, cultivate qualities of mind, and then also even emotional fluency and an emotional intelligence, that there's also a link there between them. So these kinds of more evidence or science-based approaches from that lens of looking at them, at least, was the approach that we took, that we refer to as secular, because I think there are many, many traditions. I mean, we should give credit where credit is due, right? You named Buddhism. There are many traditions, Eastern, Western, indigenous, many other traditions in which these practices exist. But for our purposes and what we focus on at the Institute, for example, and what we focused on back when we were housed within Google, was kind of this empirical approach, this sort of empirical science-based approach that enables these qualities of attention, perception, awareness, what we call mindfulness.
Yeah, I was interested. I mean, one thing I didn't have a chance to get into as much as I would have wanted in the film is the emotional intelligence part. So I'm fascinated by, why Silly felt, or why Search Inside Yourself initially felt it was important to include that emotional intelligence component, and how the program brings that out.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, these are kind of very interlinked skills. So I think the first thing to know is that we see mindfulness and emotional intelligence as a set of skills that are trainable, and that anybody can train those skills, and everyone has the capacity for mindful awareness and emotional intelligence, and that they're interlinked. That sort of, to begin to train attention and awareness is to begin to also develop qualities of emotional intelligence, like self-awareness and the ability to manage oneself and one's emotions and mental states as well. And then that even lends itself to then social awareness, awareness of others, and even environmental or situational awareness. And then the ability to exercise really skillful relationship management. So those are the 4 domains of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. And our experience was that mindfulness undergirds or can serve as a foundation for these qualities of emotional intelligence. In many ways, that is the outcome. One of the outcomes of mindfulness practice is greater emotional intelligence. And so we decided to kind of put together a curriculum that really takes you through that whole arc. That the point of departure, again, to the secular piece being what is happening in your brain on a day-to-day basis. How can you cultivate qualities of clarity and focus and calmness? And then through things like mindfulness, and then how can you activate the superpower of emotional intelligence? And that proved to be a very, very appealing thing for the employees at Google initially, and then for employees in many, many organizations around the world where we work, but also not just employees, people and communities, individuals, right? Because who couldn't use more kind of mindfulness and emotional intelligence in their lives? But yeah, initially when we started architecting this at Google, it was because Google engineers realized they had to work with other humans, and that it would be helpful to have emotional intelligence to do that. And also because, it was a challenging environment, high performance environment. And they really were looking for tools to suffer less and have kind of a more optimal experience. So for all of those reasons, we kind of created this approach that incorporates both mindfulness and emotional intelligence. And Lindsay, Lindsay, of course, you're one of our senior teachers as well. So I don't know if you have any other, thoughts on that and how it currently plays out as well. Lindsay, you head up our global teacher community. So we have over 700 certified teachers in over 50 countries around the world. And I don't think in any of those countries, Lindsay, emotional intelligence or mindfulness is thought of as a bad idea. Do you? Do you hear anything along those lines?
No, certainly not. But it obviously varies how much of an important idea it is, right? But I think the thing that really hits home for me and what you are both talking about is how secularity, in I think both all of our definitions, supports accessibility, supports right it feeling like I can like exactly what you did, Rob, like feeling like, okay, I can take these practices and adopt them for myself, and if I want to be unburdened by sense of dogma or things like that. So that to me feels like something that's that in all the countries that I'm aware of seems universal. Yeah.
When you mentioned skills too, the idea, it was great to come and film one of your workshops, because that allowed us to present to the audience this idea that, some people have this misconception, while mindfulness, that you can only do that if you're sitting quietly with your eyes closed and focusing on your breathing. But this idea that, there's mindful walking and mindful listening, and maybe both of you could talk about some of those skills and practices that you guys focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pointed to it. Our aim, literally part of our mission, is to work as a community to make mindfulness and emotional intelligence skills practical and accessible. So that is so key, right? How can you practically do these things? Because not everyone has the luxury to close your eyes, to go to a quiet place and sit down. And so one thing we are really keen on offering in all our programs are micro practices, things that you can use, ways that you can cultivate qualities of mindfulness right in the flow of your busy day. Whether it's between meetings or in the space of like 3 breaths and 30 seconds, you can do some of these things in stealth mode. You don't have to assume any position or close the eyes or anything. And so we like to think about ways to cultivate, attention, for example. You mentioned, for example, cultivating attention when you eat, cultivating attention and directing attention when you're in conversation with somebody, becoming aware of thought, kind of the quality of thought or the tone of a feeling as it arises, the moment it arises in your body or in your mind. And so those are constantly the things we're pointing to in the program. Very simple techniques and approaches to exercise these skills. And then the idea is, through neuroplasticity, the more you're able to exercise them, the stronger they become.
Yeah, that idea that the formal practice helps you kind of build up those mental muscles so that when you do need it at various times throughout the day, then it's more available.
Yeah. Now I'm curious, and Lindsay, I think you asked this question about from when the film was completed to today, what has changed? What was Lindsay, I think you framed it really nicely. You had a question for Rob, or really for all of us, I guess.
Yeah, this question I think is for both of you. And actually, I've been thinking about it as you're speaking and thinking about the reasons, Rob, you shared, having small kids at home and needing to find some kind of coping mechanism, a cause which is very close to my heart. I have 2 small kids at home. And but I'm curious, so for you, Rob, and also for you, Rich, the people you encountered in the film, both the participants and of course also the teachers had their own impetus for finding mindfulness, making it a part of their life. And so I'm curious about what you saw with respect to that. What were the reasons that people were gravitating toward it? And then now, what do you see as that? And for the folks that you may still be in contact with, what does that look like today, both then and now?
Yeah, today the mindfulness community is very busy, which I'm sure you guys are part of that. There's definitely a stronger need for mindfulness more than ever with all of the changes that have been taking place in the world this year. But it was fun to talk to some of the pioneers, some of the leaders to find out. I think for me and for a lot of people, you kind of visualize these longtime experts as just kind of always being experts, But so it was fun to find out, from John Kabat-Zinn, from Sharon Salzberg, from George Mumford, Daniel Goleman, why did you get interested in this? And it really comes back, I found, to those same key concepts of, people being stressed and needing some kind of relief or just a curiosity about it. I think George Mumford put it really well in the film where he says people come to the practice usually when they're suffering or seeking excellence, and I was in that suffering category and needing coping. And then other people are just looking for that, extra bit of, peak performance. And so it was fun to see, those kind of universal themes of how people got interested. And then, thankfully they kept going and really got it out there to the public. Um, and so, I just hope that people, since there is so much to cope with these days, that people really are getting this idea, as you both have said, that it's just a basic skill that we all have, and separating it from, some of the misconceptions of, oh, it has to be Buddhist, or it has to be, a certain type of thing, or I've got to have, crystals at home, or I've got to sit in a certain position or anything like that, and just say this, neuroscience has showed us this is how our brains work, and that these simple things are helpful based on the way our brains work. And so I just hope that these days people are finding that as one of the helpful coping skills. And besides still reaching out and turning to each other, but then even when you are turning to someone else, making the most of those moments where, as Rich was saying, with the mindful listening, of really focusing on what is this other person saying? Am I really understanding this person, instead of what we also often do of thinking what we're going to say next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would add to that. And by the way, if anyone who's listening to this is on the call right now, feel free to chat over any questions, or hit that Q&A button and send us questions. Obviously, we're in conversation with each other, but we certainly want to include you. So if you have thoughts or questions or reflections, please just hit chat or Q&A. We'll keep our eye on that. I think to add to that, Rob and Lindsay, I think our experience, certainly my personal experience, has been also that the cultivation of mindfulness is a key factor in enabling well-being and resilience. And so some people come to it to alleviate suffering. Some, like you said, come to cultivate excellence. My own experience and what we see over and over here at the Institute is people come also because they simply want to cultivate this skill of well-being. Of course, they're all interrelated, right? But like, I go back to my very first experience of meditation. I was probably 18 years old, first year of college. And I went to a martial arts class where we sat for meditation and then we did Tai Chi. And it was a game changer for me. I don't think I was particularly suffering. I mean, I was 18 years old. I was a freshman in college. Like, there wasn't a lot of suffering necessarily, but what that experience, it was like a breakthrough experience, perhaps, like for me, in the sense that it shifted a paradigm. It was like, whoa, I can step back from the mental chatter or any emotional churn that's causing difficulty, or et cetera, not to tamp it away, but to just sort of take a one step back practice almost, and simply sort of see it from a broader perspective. And all of a sudden, like, the world shifted, that I didn't have to be kind of caught by all the thoughts or the emotions, that I could experience them and hold them and contain them in a way. And that has kind of been a factor throughout my adult life that's been so helpful. So in these times, when there is so much anguish because of COVID or climate or racial justice or political landscape, what you name it, right? There are so many challenges we face. The ability to kind of find a little space find a way to revitalize in the midst of it all, and exercise a capacity of well-being is something that I am seeing amongst those who come asking for programs and so forth. Those are organizations, those are individuals. And then the other piece of that, of course, is resilience, being able to bounce back from the adversity and go from surviving to thriving. And again, these skills also enable that aspect of well-being. So all of those reasons above, I think it's neither is exclusive, but I think they're all form part of this mindfulness movement and interest in it. Looks like we may have, do we have questions? Yeah.
There's one question in the Q&A, and thank you, and please keep them coming. Questions or comments, anything you want to share. Marielle asks if you could give a school teacher one thing to do with her students. I'm a mindfulness teacher at a school and loving it. What one activity would you do? And as moderator, I'll take the privilege to add a little piece to that, which is also, if the school teacher is not able to be in person, is there another kind of additional piece that you might add?
Rob, did you see anything in, I have one thing I'll share, but did you see anything in the film or with some of the folks you talked to? Because I know you probably talk to folks who do mindfulness in schools.
Yeah, it was great to go to some different schools and see this working, not just with younger kids, but with, high schoolers who are so concerned about looking cool or not, but it was great to see when it's really part of the culture there, that they see the benefits. Obviously, a lot of what they would focus on are just kind of the simple breathing things, especially, when you first come to school or after lunch. But then now with the remote learning, if you're switching classes, then maybe just each time you log back on, a few simple breaths. I don't know with the remote learning if it would work, but there's the old classic, eating a single raisin and taking a few minutes to eat that, where I even did that at my kids' school a few times, where I would volunteer and bring some mindfulness there. Where you get a lot of, giggling and, you're asking kids to look at it and smell it and roll it, does it make a sound? And so but it's like kind of a fun way where by the end of it, even though there's some giggling, they realize, oh, I've just spent, 3 minutes just focusing on this raisin. So, but I'd be interested to hear, Rich, what you find effective.
Well, I appreciate the question asks for one thing, so I'll offer one thing, which is a game. I think for kids, especially younger kids, it's hard to sit and necessarily like do a breath practice. So I like to do a sound related practice, which is, and I think you can do this via Zoom even, right? Which is, I'm going to use a bell and I'm going to invite the kids to listen to the bell to the last bitty sound of the bell you could possibly hear. So bringing your attention to the bell, to the sound of the bell until the very, very, very last minute, full attention to the bell to the last minute. And then so ring the bell. And they can raise their hand when they hear the very last part of the bell. So gamify it would be my answer to you, and invite in like the practice of mindfulness in a kind of gamified, fun fashion that's kind of suitable for the age group.
Thank you both. We have another question, which I think is really, it's really apropos now and always for mindfulness. Although mindfulness is becoming more accepted, I still find, at least in my circles, that it is viewed as something somewhat esoteric or out there, in quotes, by those who don't practice it or in traditional companies or settings. So how do we, as champions of mindfulness and its benefits, help to make it more mainstream?
I think, Rob, you interviewed Dan Harris in he's one of the experts in the film, and some of you may have seen a clip of him elsewhere also, where he talks about the fact that in the 1950s, if you told people you're going to go out for a run, they'd say, who you're running away from, right? Like the idea that this was a form of like, that you can actually exercise your physical body to have a benefit was so strange. And I think that's analogous to the way that traditionally people who are skeptical of mindfulness think about it, which is it's sort of a nice to have, it's this esoteric thing, as you were saying there. And in reality, you know, so much more science these days points to the fact that there's huge benefits, both in terms of performance as well as wellness. And then also when you put those all together in the context of an organization, it can actually help the organization overall perform better, both in terms of what they deliver to the world, and in terms of even things like, you know, profitability or retention of talent or operational excellence. So whatever the core metric for an overall organization, let's take a business, for example, there's ways that mindfulness can contribute to that priority list. And we've actually measured it, for example. And like we have a client, a very large global, well-known software client, which is SAP. And this is on public record, so this is no secret, but we know that they've trained over 10,000 employees in mindfulness. They use our SIY core programming to do that. And they know that employee engagement, employee wellness, the ability to collaborate, creativity, the decrease in stress, decreases in absenteeism, all result from these practices of mindfulness, and those translate into business results. And they actually have those measured, and they can actually even equate them to dollar figures. And so what happens when you're able to prove the theory of the case through metrics and through, in this case, business outcomes, it makes it much, much more convincing. So just like exercise, going for a run or any form of physical exercise increases employee health, for example, and that has a good outcome for a company, mindfulness is very similar in that regard.
Yeah, and I would add that one kind of self-serving way to to help make it more mainstream. If someone's skeptical, point them to the movie, because that's really one of the main goals of why I made it, was to show people who might be skeptical or might just not be familiar, look at all these different places where it's being used. And we filmed at Aetna, we filmed with Bill George at Harvard Business School. So, you know, if it's working at Harvard Business School, there's a good chance that it'll help your company, and all the great work that Sally's done with so many organizations. So, you know, I think it just comes back to that idea that it's a simple process that happens to work based on the way our brains are wired. So if someone still has reservations, say, well, look at, you know, some of the neuroscientific research, or look at how it's being used in these big companies. You know, it's just a basic skill that we have where we can help our brains. You know, Rich, before we went live, was, you know, talking about the idea of mental hygiene. You know, we spend time with our physical hygiene, taking care of ourselves or exercising, and then this is some basic mental hygiene that, you know, was discovered thousands of years ago, but then now we have a more scientific, analytical understanding of how it works.
Yeah, and I think to that, I think it's very important to emphasize the fact that though it, you know, Rob, we met obviously because you were interested in our work within the workplace. But it's important to also emphasize that these skills, think about mental hygiene, right? Like that in cultivating these skills, they have application across sectors and across populations. You know, so certainly we got the question here from Mariel, one of our listeners, about schools and school children, but there's also application for example, veterans with PTSD in hospital or healthcare settings. You know, I have a dear friend, Dr. Rina Katecha, who's training surgeons to cultivate their attention and to cultivate their awareness in the operating theater for example. So there are these, and we also here at the Institute, we've trained some criminal justice agencies, like in Los Angeles. We had allied criminal justice agencies to help them use the skills of mindfulness to build better situational awareness, better connection and empathy with their stakeholders and those whom they serve. And we had folks from LAPD and the Superior Court, public defenders, prosecutors across the board, social workers, folks across those allied agencies cultivating these skills so that they can serve better and perhaps even correct some of the things. And that's a kind of very large aspiration, but it's a beginning. It's a beginning way to start to kind of reset kind of that mental hygiene factor, so that we can be our best no matter where we show up, no matter what sector we live and work in. And if it goes no further than your own home, because goodness knows, I've tried to really practice this in my own home, right? With my spouse and I have a teenage son. And more than ever, and because we're home all together so much, as so many of us are, it's even more crucial, right? So whether the application be extremely personal and immediate in your kind of immediate sphere or in whatever sector you work, I think there is this sense, from my perspective at least, that there's this utility, this broad applicability that allows us to be our best no matter what our endeavor is. Ooh, yeah.
I'd just say one other aspect to the business setting part of it is, there has been criticism too of, are these companies just trying to squeeze a little more productivity out of their workers? But this idea, as Rich was saying, it's a great skill, which obviously you take home too. So, even if maybe the initial company motivation is for that it really is, helping employee wellness, well-being, throughout their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing some really good comments and questions. One question is about seated meditation, that this participant is saying they do more movement meditation. Great. There are so many there are literally, I think, hundreds, if not more, different types of meditations and mindfulness practice. And so what's key is what works for you, what works well for you. I've had participants who've had different conditions that necessarily couldn't do a seated meditation or a attention-focused meditation, but it had to be more kind of an open awareness, what we call open awareness practice, right? Perception of sensation rather than breath necessarily, or harnessing attention. So, there are so many, we don't have time to cover them, but I would just say, like, whatever works best for you, commit to it and then practice it, because the benefit, as we know, comes from the regular and consistent practice to the extent it's possible for you. And even a little bit makes a difference. A little bit often can make a huge difference. So whether it be a movement practice or it be, a direct, like attention, like to breath practice, they all have very similar benefits. They've been studied differently. So some have been more studied than others, but they all seem to be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what was important for me to show in the film, was these different ways that you can practice. Because just as we found, in schools, some people are more visual learners or more auditory learners. And so encouraging people to feel that sense of freedom, if you are more physical, or if you have trouble, closing your eyes, no problem. Here's other ways where you can adapt it and still feel good about what you're doing, instead of, oh, I'm not really doing it right, or I should be doing it this other way.
And actually, to those points, another attendee here is writing in, is a 90-year-old resident of a venerable group. Welcome, thank you for being here, and asking for ideas on practice with children or adults with limiting health issues. And so I think that also is sort of even a step further. Ideas or thoughts on, if we're working with somebody with a limiting health issue, or ways that they might approach that.
Yeah. So those are two very robust questions, right? One for limiting health issues and one for children. Well, let's start with the children because there's lots of resources there for children. There's wonderful books. I think there's one that I got my son way back. I think it was called like Mindful Piggy Meditation. It's about a little pig who meditates and like what that is. So there's lots of books, and there's also some nice resources like mindfulschools.org or Mind Up are programs that focus on school-age children. And they offer lots of different practices. The practice that I talked about here, the gamified sound practice, is an example of one. They do other games like holding an ice cube and to the last possible moment you can stand it, but noticing the sensation, and lots of ways that make it much more accessible for kids. So I would recommend looking at mindfulschools.org or at the Mind Up program. Or if you have teenagers who want to actually go deeper, they have, there's a nonprofit called iBeme, like the I and then BEME, and they hold retreats for teenagers, mindfulness retreats for teenagers of various lengths. So I think it's typically a weekend. And so they practice different forms of mindfulness there. That would be for kids. And then for folks with limiting issues, that's a very broad category, but these days, there's a lot of apps that offer different types of practices that can be pretty accessible for folks. So calm.com is one that I really like. And they offer some are very simple. Like you can just listen to the rain and see a beautiful high resolution kind of video of rain falling as a way to promote relaxation. And then they have more formal practices of progressive relaxation, et cetera, and that you can use those, via sound. Now, if there's other limiting issues, I'm sure there's other organizations that offer ones that are more oriented, tactily or specifically designated for healing different conditions. Like I said, with veterans, post-traumatic stress disorder is something where mindfulness is being applied to really, really good effects with veterans returning from the war theater. And so really it just depends on what the sort of, what the purpose is, but chances are, because of the broad applicability of these skills, there is a group out there that focuses on that specific health concern that you may have.
Yeah, and one of the groups that we filmed with, the Mindful Veteran Project, and they obviously have some older veterans too with various health issues. And so body scans is a good one that they use a lot, where you can be just sitting in a chair. You don't have to be in a specific position. You don't even have to close your eyes, but just focusing on, gradually scanning, whether it's top to bottom or bottom to top, but just kind of paying attention to the different parts of your body. And, John Kabat-Zinn's work really started all with chronic pain at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And that idea of using mindfulness to kind of change the relationship to pain, where you're still noticing it, of course, but you're kind of getting curious about it and finding out more about it instead of just focusing on the suffering, figuring out, processing, what are ways where I can notice it, but then still get beyond just, the pain aspect. So that's something that might be helpful. We also have a few bonus videos at the website when you rent or buy the film. And one of them is from Diana Winston at the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center, where she demonstrates the mindful movement exercises. But since we were doing this on Zoom, it's hard to, move all around. So she actually demonstrated these exercises that you can do while you're still sitting in a chair. So the combination for older people of still, getting a little movement, but doing this in a very gentle, mindful way still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And I would also add, I think in the film you have our friend Judson Brewer, right? Dr. Judson Brewer, who has a lot of mindfulness approaches to deal with addiction, for example. And I think in some of his work, he's done anti-smoking or smoking cessation programs using mindfulness, and also, kind of around weight management and food, and a whole range of other addictions that he's applied mindfulness approaches to. So, and they're very empirically based, and he studies them. He's a sort of PhD, MD, yeah, I think all of these are different ways that you can start to explore ways to draw on and cultivate mindfulness to, help with any of these health issues.
One question I'd love to know, Rich and Lindsay, from your perspective is, one of the main issues is, oh, mindfulness sounds great, and I've tried it some, but I have a hard time sticking with it. What have you guys found with all of your work at Silly in terms of getting over some of those hurdles?
Well, Lindsay, why don't I kick it over to you? So you talk to our teachers a lot. Some of them I think are even on this call. What are some of the things you're hearing? I certainly have ideas, but I would love to hear what you're hearing or seeing.
Yeah, the thing that popped into my mind, both for myself personally and within our teaching community, is indeed community. Having opportunities to practice together. One thing that I was so delighted to see, our teachers came together and did a 24 hours of practice kindness, where we did a compassion practice every half an hour, a different person leading for half an hour over the course of a day. And just this opportunity to, especially now with so many people doing remote work, where you can actually connect with people all over the world, that option has become so much more obvious and accessible. So this idea of creating community for people to sit with, or not sit, as the case may be, but to practice with, and also talk about the struggles with. I think there's a lot of acknowledgement and listening that's just so healing unto itself in this current time. But yeah, so community, coming together, finding ways to come together, even if it's with two people, to practice together. I mean, I have friends who just use their phones and actually just make a phone call, even without video, which I think is so funny. But just like, okay, let's meditate together. Let's do a little mindful movement together. And personally, for me, that's the only way I can keep going. I will just forget about it, or I'll get sidetracked by something. But having colleagues who are practicing always helps call me back.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the other thing I would add to that, one thing I can add, and this is really from a personal perspective, is habituating it, building the habit pattern. And those are three words I put intentionally together: building, habit, pattern, right? So the best example I have of this is brushing your teeth. I don't know about you, but I brush my teeth at a certain time of day, and it's usually right when I wake up. Almost always for my entire life, it's been, I wake up, I go to the restroom, and I brush my teeth. So that in many ways is instantiating a habit pattern. Well, what I've done in my life is kind of instantiate the habit pattern. There's two habit patterns that I instantiate, which is I brush my teeth, and then I go and I sit down and I do my morning meditation. So much so that it's become kind of almost like automatic, right? Like I get out of bed and those are the two things that I do: teeth, meditate. And so much so that if I don't do the meditating, something feels like it's missing. And then if I don't do the meditating, because there are some days where, like, if I've slept in, and I tend to be a very early riser, so that helps because I'm up before my family is and so forth, okay? But there are days where I just couldn't sleep the night before, I got woken up or whatever, and I'm like, I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I'm late. I don't have time to stop and sit down and do what I normally do. And then I give myself a pass. It's okay. It's like not like, so I didn't meditate today. I'd like to meditate most or every day, but sometimes it doesn't happen. But most days, because it's a habit pattern, because I have a fairly predictable kind of rhythm, which is I go to sleep early, I wake up early, I brush my teeth, I meditate, and the day starts. It's kind of like that, instantiating the habit pattern. So that would be a suggestion for you. And it doesn't mean you have to wake up early, and it doesn't mean you have to do it right after you brush your teeth. But if there is a space for you to instantiate a habit pattern around this, see if you can play with that and see what it would be like to install that. That would be my one suggestion.
Yeah, and one thing that I found talking to a lot of people is this idea too, as you were saying, if you happen to skip a day, don't beat yourself up too much, but also that idea while you're meditating to not beat yourself up too much. It's like our minds are going to wander all the time, right? That's the way we're built. And that idea that when you do notice that and bring it back to your breath or whatever your point of focus is, that's the good part. That's, you've actually just, built that mental muscle a little bit. So after talking to a lot of people and hearing that a lot, I came up with this thing that's helpful for me of just saying to myself, quietly, mentally, welcome back. That, it becomes, just helps me have it become a positive thing of, okay, my mind wandered. And instead of saying, oh, why did it wander again? I'm not focusing as much as just a gentle welcome back, to where you put kind of a positive spin to it.
I love that. And, just the self-kindness piece of it, like being kind to yourself, is so important, because it's easy to kind of get, kind of caught up in sort of an achievement orientation or an evaluative kind of thing around all this. And it's not a contest, right? It's not, it's really just taking care of yourself. So anytime you can do it, it is a nice reminder to be kind to yourself and welcome yourself. The other thing I'd say, just to reinforce what Lindsay said, which is the community so helpful, having a group of friends or colleagues in this case who practice this, because those days sometimes when I don't get to practice at home after brushing my teeth, I show up at work and we do a minute of practice before we start a meeting, or we have sits, half an hour sits once a week here at our office. So just being in good company of folks who also are oriented towards this really helps. Are we almost done with the time here?
Yes, we want to be conscious of our time. We have about 2 and change minutes left. And so appreciating it and all the suggestions that you both have shared. I'm curious if you have anything you'd like to leave us with, and thank you again also to everyone who's chatted in your comments and questions. It's been really, really great to have you engaged and connected. So, Rich, Rob, is there anything you'd like to leave us with in this conversation?
Well, I'll say again, just thank you for hosting this, and it's just so fun to whenever I get a chance to talk about, it starts maybe as a conversation about the film, but quickly becomes mindfulness in general and people exchanging ideas and what's helpful for them, or what they've learned from other people. So. And that's part of that sense of community. So I'm grateful for you providing another opportunity for a discussion, and just encourage other people. Those are great opportunities. If you do meet someone who has a misconception or just isn't aware of it, this idea that then you can kind of become an ambassador for mindfulness, and help spread this. And that was really the goal of the film, to help spread this to as many people as possible.
Yeah, thank you. And I would also thank you all for being here, and your attention and your interest and your commitment to this, this set of practices we call mindfulness, and also just kind of the appreciation that we're all here doing this stuff because it really helps us all, each one of us individually, align to the best within ourselves. And so may your practice of mindfulness and may your pursuit of this align with the best in you, and may you be well. So thank you.
Thank you both so much. And again, congratulations, Rob, on the film. And we've dropped in the link if you still haven't had a chance to watch it, to check it out. And it's a beautiful way to create ambassadorship for mindfulness. Thank you both for the work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.